Hi, I'm Michael Roub. I've been a corporate executive and consultant for more than 2 decades. And in that time, I've been heavily involved in the sale and acquisition of several companies, and in particular, medical and dental practices. Today, I want to share with you the 5 most important lessons I've learned when acquiring medical and dental practices. Now, this is in addition to an article I previously wrote, which was Discover 10 Strategies Now to Sell Your Business for Maximum Value. That's an overriding key top 10 things that you must be thinking about as an owner of any business when selling your company to either a small or a large buyer. But today, in addition to those 10 steps, I want to speak specifically to healthcare owners, healthcare practice owners in particular, about the 5 most important lessons I've learned. Yeah. I was vice president of business development at 2 large companies in both medical and dental, US Healthworks and Western Dental, and acquired more than 50 practices. During that time, I looked at hundreds more that I didn't buy. But far too often, I saw a very common storyline. Practice owners had not taken all the right steps to sell their business, sell their practice for maximum value. I mean, this is the most important economic event of their career. You've been steadily building a practice, making a good living, but now's the time to capitalize on all that you've built, and money gets left on the table. And at the time you're ready to sell, there are some steps you can take, and certainly things you can prepare for a little bit in advance that will really drive more value. So I encourage you to look at the top 10 strategies to sell your business for maximum value that I put together. But in addition, let's take these factors into consideration today, because we can really do some things that set you apart from other practices, that give a buyer a lot of confidence that there's an opportunity and upside in your business, and make them want to engage with you and ultimately pay the price that you want for your practice. The first thing I want to talk about, number 1, is understand your payer mix and opportunities for growth. If I asked 100 doctors, tell me your practice mix, tell me your payer mix, 99 or 100 out of 100 be able to say, well, I take 80% PPO, 10% HMO, roughly, or I see almost all PPO patients, whatever the answer might be. Every practice owner should know that. Every buyer is going to want to know that answer. But there's more to that question and more to the answer you should be providing. Peel the onion a little more. Where are the opportunities? Where are the challenges? Does the practice limit any payers? That would be an opportunity. I acquired a dental practice that limited their practice to only 2 Medicare patients a day. Well, they were in a market where Medi-Cal patients were knocking on their door. That's a huge opportunity for a buyer who's comfortable taking on that patient population. And by properly articulating that, it helps a buyer see the upside, the value, that not that you've already captured in your practice, but certainly why they should confidently pay a good price for the practice. Are there any challenges? Didn't have a given contract because we couldn't get it. While you don't want to highlight negatives, you need to be prepared to answer those questions. So think through where you've had challenges and have an answer, have a response, but be honest. Even if the answer isn't what you'd like to tell a buyer, the truth will come out in a transaction process. So being as honest as possible up front is critical to giving confidence to the buyer that you are a credible seller and that the deal will make sense. Help the buyer understand the untapped value. So getting back to where there's payer opportunities, where there's an insurance opportunity, whatever you can do to help a buyer confidently understand there's upside with your payer mix and there's opportunities for growth, that will drive value. 2, practice metrics. Data matters. Hopefully every practice owner can tell you your date. You can tell your daily patient volume, hopefully your revenue per visit. But all buyers will want to know that information, and it's whatever you can provide is valuable. The more you can provide is valuable, as long as it's presented in an organized, digestible fashion. But key things about billing amounts or collections by CPT code, what are your top revenue generators? So are you doing in the dental space? Are you doing are you doing a lot of crown and bridge work? Are you doing orthodontics? Where is their opportunity? What is currently driving the patient volume? What's driving the patient revenue? That again helps the buyer understand what's presently there and what the upside is. And if you're providing that data up front as opposed to being reactive to it, you're setting yourself apart from a large number of other practices out there that are selling, that are being reactive to the buyer, providing the bare minimums up front. Be the seller that is giving the right information up front. The buyers will absolutely recognize they're dealing with a qualified, competent seller who knows their practice. That drives value. So, if I can just use one word with that, is prepare. Staying with your practice for 6 to 12 months after sale is my number 3. Now, the majority of the time I acquired practices, the doctor owners would be looking to exit the practice as quickly as possible after they got their money. Sometimes as a buyer, we were looking to entice the seller to stay on board for a period of time. In either case, recognize the value here. Clearly, the most valuable asset in many, many practices is the provider owner, the doctor who has built the practice, the patients respect and want to continue seeing as their doctor. You have every right to retire, you have every right to move on. But if you leave, what does that do for the patient base? What does that do for the confidence of the buyer? So, as opposed to having the buyer try to entice you to stay, be upfront that you would like to stay on board to see an orderly transition. I think that gives, again, a buyer a lot of confidence. You understand the importance of a smooth transition. That helps the patient stay on board, gives the patients confidence that you're still going to be there. This is a good thing for the practice to have a new partner involved, and that over time you're going to phase out, but they've been left in good hands and they've been introduced to the new ownership and new team and feel comfortable that this is a place where they should keep coming to be treated as a patient. So that's going to drive value for the buyer post-close, and therefore that gives them comfort, again, of paying a strong value at the time of the closing of the transaction. Now, in addition, if you're an owner of a multi-doctor practice or a small group or a large group, a buyer, particularly a sophisticated buyer, is going to be very concerned or focused on the other providers and will they stay on board and how do we keep them locked up or comfortable that this is good for them as well. In that regard, you're going to need to be prepared to speak with your speak with the providers shortly before closing. Potentially give the buyers an opportunity to speak to those providers, or at least the critical ones, to give either a written contract or obligation to stay on board, or at least have had the dialogue to know that confidently the doctors, those other doctor providers, are going to stay on board post-close. Because if they buy it and the next day there isn't anyone there to treat patients, obviously there's going to be a tremendous amount of problem and value lost. So be prepared as an owner and as a manager of other providers, if you're in a large group, to stay on board post-transaction and to have your staff, your key providers, do the same. Number 4 is compliance and legal considerations. This can be a dicey situation here. If you have unresolved issues or open items, it's certainly not something that you're looking to highlight for a buyer. That being said, a buyer is going to understand this or learn about it in due diligence. So you need to be prepared and be upfront the best that you can. Position yourself from a point of understanding the situation and addressing it, as opposed to, again, being reactive to a buyer. If you've had audits from insurance payers of any type in the last 3 years prior to close of a transaction, prepare the information. Let the buyer know what the audit was, what the results were, if there were any findings that required effort on your part or correction, what was the plan of correction, how was it resolved. Give the buyer confidence that yes, there have been some specific items of concern or interest and they've been resolved. If there's an open matter, the same thing should apply. Here is where we stand in the process. Here is all the documentation. We feel the outcome will be X or Y. Let the buyer know. If you don't disclose this information, it's going to come out at some point. And post-transaction, if the buyer is hit with any compliance or legal issues, likely to be recourse on you as a seller, which could be much more expensive than having dealt with it up front. If you've disclosed it and the buyer is comfortable, you've resolved it in the transaction how this should or shouldn't be managed on your part, and you won't have any material concerns post-closing of a transaction. The same applies to employee litigation or patient litigation in addition to any insurance payer audits. Be proactive, be prepared, and be ready to address these matters. Number 5, provider agreements and credentialing files. Oftentimes, the majority of transactions I worked on, a seller didn't have every single box checked of all the credentialing materials that were needed for a buyer. While you as a practice and already has your contacts in place and are running fine, when a transaction closes, particularly if business is transferred to a new tax ID or a new medical group, new contracts have to be set up with insurance payers. That's going to require re-credentialing of doctors. If all that information isn't available or prepared in advance of closing, there's going to be a gap or challenges of getting some of those contracts onboarded. Buyers understand this, and it's a big concern because it's a huge financial risk for them. So they want to shorten the time frame of any transition of payer contracts or having any doctor properly credentialed. Having that packet ready, having everything up to date, one, you should for your own compliance purposes and your own credentialing purposes. But two, you're handing the buyer something of great value. And I can assure you, you're separating yourself from other sellers because it is uncommon that it's well organized, well prepared, and handing the buyer something that they desperately need prior to closing. Again, what you do today can drive a lot of value tomorrow. Being prepared is going to set you up for getting maximum value in a deal. So we've talked about 5 things here. They're all highly relevant and very particular to medical and dental practices. Going back to the top 10 strategies that I outlined for any business, coupled with these 5 strategies, you're going to drive more value, give a buyer more confidence, be better prepared, and most importantly for you as a seller, as an owner, get maximum value in a transaction. Now, every practice is unique and has different challenges and different opportunities. So you may have something, you certainly would have something specific and unique to your practice that is worth discussing further and may not be like the doctor down the street. So having a qualified advisor, having somebody who can guide you to some items specific to your practice is also going to be very critical. I would welcome the opportunity to talk to any owner or any management team about their business, their practice, and situations that are in particular unique to their situation to help address them, prepare, and be really ready to put the deal out there to any buyer and achieve maximum value in a transaction. So I welcome the opportunity to have you speak with me or anyone on the Inflection 360 team and see how we can help your medical practice or your dental practice sell for maximum value. Thank you very much.